Sometimes, when you let the power of oppressive governments go unchecked, they grow their tentacles beyond their own borders. Today, we talk about some such regimes. Welcome to another episode of Beyond Left and Right. This is The Death of a Journalist. On 2nd October, Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi entered the Saudi consulate in Istanbul, never to return again. He used to write for Washington Post, lived in America, and led a pretty moderate life. His body, as we know now, was brutally chopped by the assassins in what would look like a James Bond-like hit job. And it is an open secret now that the whole assassination was commissioned by Mohammed bin Salman, the 32-year-old Prince of Saudi Arabia. He has a great love for portraying himself as a progressive Saudi leader and has rebranded himself as MBS. And like the case before with many Americans and the Saudis, MBS enjoys full friendship and support of the American President Donald Trump. And this is not the only president he is friends with or his father is friend with, but more on that later. Jamal Khashoggi's death has sent shockwaves through the world. Everybody's been covering it because he was an extremely popular writer. But he wasn't the only one mercilessly hacked by the Saudi assassins. Also, something that really comes to mind is how complicit the Turkish government has been in the whole process. Apparently, they knew exactly what was happening. But that is something you expect from the Turkish given the kind of oppressive regime that they are running in there. Here's the funny or the tragic thing based on how you look at the situation. Jamal merely had disagreements with the Saudis. He was never a rabid critic of the empire. So for him to suffer such a fate actually says a lot about a regime that would not even tolerate even disagreements with people who are not even living in their own country. Or as Nassim Taleb rightly points out, it's not Saudi Arabia, it's Saudi Barbaria. If you don't trust me, check out this video clip of John Oliver talking about how MBS has tortured and arrested his own people in what he would call an anti-corruption purge.
This happened.
New footage from inside the Ritz-Carlton Hotel in Saudi Arabia's capital, Riyadh, shows the dramatic transformation from a favorite haunt of the well-heeled into arguably the world's most luxurious prison.
It's true. MBS used that Ritz-Carlton to lock up hundreds of businessmen and members of the royal family in a so-called anti-corruption campaign. At least 17 detainees were reportedly hospitalized for physical abuse, and one Saudi military officer died in custody.
And not just this, the Saudi empire has been taking its chances with violence and thuggery for a long time. Apart from waging a devastating war in Yemen, which is its neighbor and one of the poorest Arab countries, they've also abducted the Prime Minister of Lebanon, and they made him resign on the national television. Let that sink in. 2016 alone, 47 Saudi Arabian civilians were executed for simple charges like protests and a demand for free and fair elections. Yes, they were killed by beheading, their heads were chopped off, and for the ones whose heads were not chopped off, they were actually shot by the firing squads for simple demands that would look very reasonable in any other part of the world. And hey, talking about the other parts of the world, we were never really going to just stick with Saudi Arabia. We were going to cover other countries in this particular video. So yeah, which are the other ones? China and Russia. Let's start with China. China has developed a very bad reputation of kidnapping its own journalists from all around the world, bringing them back to China, and then punishing them and shaming them publicly. And that's not even the worst crime that they have committed. The Xinjiang region in China is home to more than 1 million people from the Uyghur descent. These are called the Uyghur Muslims, and they have been the main target of the Chinese oppressive regime in the last few years. China is now in the process of persecuting and re-educating these Uyghur Muslims. This might simply be one of the biggest ethnic segregation and oppressive exercises going on in the world right now. The Muslims in these regions are forced and encouraged to drink alcohol, which is essentially against their religion, and they are arrested if they are seen practicing their religion openly. Yep. And hey, there is something called the Chinese conquest of Hollywood that's taking place as we speak. At any given point, no more than 34 Hollywood movies can be released in China per year. This means the Americans are practically crafting their movies to get them to release in China for the massive market and to fit in with the Chinese propaganda. Guys like Richard Gere, who openly support the liberation of Tibet or the Tibetan independence, are now being dropped randomly from the movies because Chinese business houses are investing heavily in those movies and they do not want to see a guy like Richard Gere who supports Tibet. Now to our favorite Bond villain Vladimir Putin, who has a bit of a reputation with silencing his critics. For example, the members of punk rock band called Pussy Riot have been repeatedly imprisoned and even poisoned on occasions because of their opposition to Vladimir Putin, whom they consider, rightfully, as the dictator of Russia. Pussy Riot has an extremely feministic and pro-LGBT view of the world, which does not go down well with the Russian premier. And random punk rock bands are not the only people Vladimir Putin likes to pick up a fight with. His assassinations are well known and well documented. A simple Google search will show up results like these. Let's take the example of Viktor Yushchenko, the Ukrainian politician and also the presidential candidate of 2004 with an extremely pro-West agenda, who was poisoned obviously because he fell out of favor with Vladimir Putin. And you can see his face on one side, which is a perfectly healthy face. The other side is the face poisoned by dioxin. He obviously survived not without the scars. And in all fairness, the atrocities of Russia and Vladimir Putin have been well documented by the Western media. It's the kind of media that we read usually. And that is because Russia has never really seen eye to eye with the rest of the Western world, which is not the case with Saudi Arabia and China. And that's what we are coming to. Here's a video of Donald Trump talking about the trade deal with Saudi.
Have been approved and are currently under construction and will be delivered to Saudi Arabia very soon, and that's for their protection. But if you look in terms of dollars, $3 billion, $533 million, $525 million, that's peanuts for you. Should have increased it. $880 million, $645 million, $6 billion, that's for frigates.
Spooky, right? Well, one of the reasons why the Americans do not want to piss the Saudi Arabians off is because Saudi Arabia has one of the largest defense budgets in the world. Well, a big chunk of that budget is what they have been using to wage a horrible war over Yemen. And you can just Google it yourself and you'll find it. It's terrible. The other country is China, against which the Americans will not speak. That's because China is the largest trade partner of the United States of America. So in conclusion, we will not be hearing about too much human rights violations from these two countries, at least, simply because a lot of media will not cover it. And so, no matter how much we hate today's media and its prominent faces, the main idea stays: who else will report the uncomfortable stories? The world has always been powerless against assholes with state by their side. But there is some cathartic release when information and a sense of purpose brings even the biggest men down. Our ability to communicate is perhaps the single most important ability that we have, and media is just an offshoot of that ability. When governments go after media, journalists and dissidents, they are, by proxy, maiming our own communication. This is when societies begin to crumble. And it doesn't matter whether the threat comes from the left or the right. If we ignore it, it will be at our doorstep before we know it.